there is still an investor perception that China and North Asia in general are contingent plug-ins into a global environment supply chain. And then you look at something like what's happening in Japan now. You look at how the traditional trading houses and the very large conglomerates, the traditional Zaibatsu, you look at how they're actually creating their own supply infrastructure within Asia to create a larger, more integrated economic platform that includes not just manufacturing, not just food distribution, but it's including a much more digital world. It's not the old Mitsubishi heavy industry as much as establishing much greater and deeper links across a very large portion of the world with very large population growth, with levels of demand and activity that mean that Asia is becoming a more integrated digital as well as physical landscape. And the West hasn't really picked this up. Most people in the West have still seen this sort of manufacturing workshop of the world sitting in Asia to feed the demands in the West. But you reverse that process and say, where is the middle class growing fastest? The idea of the middle class growing to be a third of the population of China, it's something that Sav, I know, talked about. When I was looking at India, the story of India is the market of tomorrow and always will be, because they just don't seem to quite get their act together. But the demand patterns that are there, the idea of this emerging Indian middle class, it's fine until you realize the definition of the Indian middle class back in the 90s was your middle class if you have a refrigerator in your house. That's there's a relative shift, in other words. Yeah. But now the middle class in India, or the wealthy urban community in India, in China, in large parts of Southeast Asia, are as wealthy as their counterparts in the West, if not more so, to the extent that they're growing incomes quickly. Their demands and interests for 5G technology or for services or infrastructure or spending, the growth in robo-advisor financial business in the Indian subcontinent is massive, huge by comparison to anything that we've anticipated. So these domestically generated demand patterns and markets are available. You need to make sure if you're investing in them, you're recognizing they themselves have growth dynamics that are different from the old visualization of a plug into a third-party demand, and we wanted to buy into the businesses that were benefiting from growth in the Western economies. And I think that failure of investment infrastructure to really pick up and to still actually have this emerging market category, as if somehow the frontier markets, where you still have major concerns about corporate governance and liquidity, central bank policy, capital market risk, as well as corporation exposure and political risk, all of those traditional EM worries. It's quite hard just to say, well, I'm going to treat frontier markets and emerging markets as a collective basket versus the rest, when we're really beginning to move into a world where actually the greater integration, I think one of the big stories that perhaps people aren't particularly picking up on is this greater integration that Japan and China have as they're moving from this sort of manufacturing to services, from physical to digital world. These large institutions that operate in Japan and in the United States, and in China, the link ups and the deals that are taking place with the likes of of Tencent and the large Sobu trading houses in Japan. This is the region that Itochu and Mitsubishi and these kind of companies are being invested in now by Warren Buffett, for example. He is recognizing that the skill set, the experience, the understanding of these trading operations in Japan, being able to access this market I've just been describing is probably significantly greater than anybody in the West appreciates in terms of its potential generation of what we ultimately all invest in, which is cash flow.
Yeah.
You've got demand, you've got integration, infrastructure, you've got an awful lot going on here. And that really then becomes a very important message to take away.
If you'd like to hear this interview in its entirety, then head on over to SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other major podcast platform and search Four Corners Podcast.